All right, welcome back. This is the Everything Jer Show. I am Jeremy, and we got a special guest today, Katelynne Schuler. I am kind of doing a new series recently. I put out a feeler on Facebook to just reach out to all these people that I'm connected with, people that I've met in real life, people that I haven't, that I've just talked to on the internet. And Katelynne was nice enough to volunteer and come on the show. So Katelynne, thank you for coming on. How you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you for having me.
So we kind of, I know a little bit about you. I enjoy seeing a lot of your posts. You kind of have some long posts that are pretty in-depth with some very unique points of view. And then I feel like you always have a lot of friends on Facebook comment on your posts, and your comment threads are usually can be very interesting. But something that I've been interested to hear more about is you have like a game house that you run. Is that right?
Yeah. For most of the pandemic, I worked on doing community houses. That would be, my friend had a property management building that he runs, where he takes care of the responsibilities that come with renting a full house, but not necessarily with just renting the room of the house, and taking profit in exchange for, handling those responsibilities as he rents out the rooms.
Nice.
And during the pandemic, as people were feeling more isolated and whatnot, and moving around and trying to find a comfortable place to shelter, I utilized his business to try to organize a few community houses. And I also supported other community houses in the area, because I was really concerned with making sure people found compatible spaces where it's like, hey, if it's somewhere where, you just want to be quiet, where you want to live in a house of like super quiet remote workers, where everybody kind of keeps to themselves, and they usually like order takeout or box meals, so like nobody leaves a messy kitchen or something like that, I'll help you find that house. If you want something where, everybody does like yoga at 10 a.m. together, like whatever, I'll help you find that house too. So I was doing that for a while, but a couple of years beforehand, well before the pandemic, I'd always had this idea of having a game house, just because there's like some social scene gaps, I think, in the market. And I personally used to work for a casino. I used to be a pit boss.
Nice. That's cool.
Yeah.
What casino, or what state were you in?
Casino Matrix. Previously, before that, I was for Garden City Casino.
Nice.
So kind of separate casinos, but same owners. And then, well, before that, I was a professional gamer, like playing video games.
No way.
So,
what games were you professional in?
The only one that I've ever played like actually professional, as in like made like actual profit, like could support myself and like live, would be Halo 3.
Nice.
I would go to MTG tournaments and have my butt absolutely handed to me. I never got sponsored, and that's where like the real money is in getting sponsored. So like if Doritos or Mountain Dew decides to like pay you to go to these tournaments and like wear their gear, and wants to like put you on the merchandise, and has like booth babes and booths there where they're giving out, and crap has your face on it and all that. So I was never like doing it on that level and making that money. And this was also well before the Twitch days, where you made money off of that. Huh?
I was gonna say, were you twitching, or was it before Twitch?
Yeah, so it wasn't a Twitch thing. So how I made money was through tournaments. So just basically just winning.
Wow.
And it's very small scale. I didn't have a lot of expenses at the time, so to say that it was enough to sustain me, like I could live off of it, sounds very generous, but it's more modest than it sounds, just because I was a young adult and I was living very frugally and minding my expenses. But yeah, So I'd go to local tournaments like at GameStops and other places. And sometimes there are cash prizes. Sometimes they would give a good amount of merchandise, and I could just flip the value of the merchandise. But that's what put food on the table for me when I was a young adult.
Nice. Curious, just little side question. Was gaming as fun when you kind of had to do it for money, or did it lose a little bit of its amusement?
So it's kind of a funny question to ask, just because very quickly did I decide to monetize off of it. I wasn't a gamer growing up as a kid.
Right.
I mean, I got my hands on my cousin's video games every once in a while. I would be able to play with him. I was pretty good. And he was like an older boy, but I would still beat him. And I don't think I conceptualized how I was too fixated on that, like, oh, I beat a bigger kid and like a boy. And it's silly for me to have been impressed with that. The thing that I think I should have been impressed with was this person is addicted to this video game and plays it all the time. And I can pick it up after a short amount of time and beat him at it.
Yeah.
That didn't quite click with me. So but I never really owned one myself, like growing up, and I wasn't really a gamer then. But after I became independent, I got exposed to like more video game culture through a boyfriend, and I kind of stayed back from it for a little while because I didn't want to like tread on male space, and I wanted him to have his guy time. And even though he was quite encouraging, I had reservation. But then I just picked it up, and it was just like a duck to water, especially since I had been paying attention. So I was able to do a lot of call outs.
All right.
So I was able to be like, I was able to like be over at Guardian and be like, oh, he's one shot over at Yellow 2 or something like that. And for somebody to just start the game and be able to know the call outs was pretty funny.
Yeah.
So I was always kind of like a wonky player where I had like extreme strengths, but also extreme weaknesses, because how it is that I got there was always strange. But
Right.
yeah, gaming's always been a part of my life as an adult. And it didn't take long for me to just decide, like, I can figure out how to get paid at this. I like working on the economics of making things self-sustainable.
Right.
Like, I think around the same time, I was also a little while after I started doing professional gaming, as in like Halo. I also was playing this MMO RPG called Gaia Online. It's kind of hard to explain what the game is, because there's like a lot of different facets about it, but it has its own economy. And there are people that get really addicted to it, to where if you're grindy and you collect a lot of something or this and that or what have you, you're able to sell and trade for like real life money.
Interesting.
So I ended up doing a little bit of that on the side too. So I've just kind of always had a mind for learning how to make money at playing games.
When was that game Gaia around? I feel like that sounds kind of like the beginnings of Bitcoin. Wasn't like Mt. Gox a gaming kind of exchange at first, and then kind of pivoted to Bitcoin? Are you familiar with that?
I would definitely say that games like this were like the kind of precursor to things like cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Just because it's like digital economic function, and we wouldn't know what we need to know about digital currency to have been able to create cryptocurrency if it weren't for games like this.
Right.
I believe I was playing this game a bit before cryptocurrency had been developed. I mean, there might have been people who were working on it at the time and people talking about how it's on the horizon. I think it was probably around the time when people started working on blockchain a little bit more, but before cryptocurrency.
Interesting. Cool.
So I think that would be back in 2009.
Yeah, that sounds about right far as right before Bitcoin really started.
Yeah, right before that. was a thing. So I've always had a mind for, you know, profiting off of games. Oops, pardon.
Are you all right?
Yeah. I just accidentally tipped something over, but it was nothing fragile and no biggie.
Nice.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that I have never gambled.
No way. Why is
Even
that?
though I have had a full life of monetizing and you know, my career living off of games in different ways, I've never gambled, and a part of that is just I'm protecting my dopamine.
I was gonna say, I feel like there's a couple things that you kind of touched upon as you've been talking that I feel like I've heard you talk about before. Dopamine, like addiction with dopamine, and then a little bit actually, it might be a little bit of a stretch, but you were saying how like your boyfriend was playing video games and you kind of wanted to give like him his boy time. I feel like I've definitely seen you comment a bit on like gender roles a bit. Am I right on that? Or?
Yeah, and I think most of the other interviews that I've done in the past have largely revolved around my stance when it comes to anti-feminism and men's rights, traditionalism, gender roles, evolutionary psychology, quote unquote red pill, that milieu. Yeah, so I think that's one that I talked about a little bit more.
What would you enjoy talking about more? Dopamine addiction and staying away from dopamine a bit, or gender roles? Because I'm kind of interested to hear your take on either of those.
Well, the dopamine thing is pretty brief, so
All right.
I can just wrap that up, and then you can ask me about gender roles after I wrap that up.
Perfect.
So I basically I'm very conscientious about how I'm going to enjoy life and how life in large is a chemical experience. I've always had more or less a reverence for this, and I think it's because my family has always had a very strong dialogue around brain chemistry. You know, different family members who have had addictions, different, family members who have had depression, different family members who have had other health issues or tendencies, and different makeups. Fortunately, my family has a really strong dialogue around brain chemistry, so I've always been very conscientious about that. And I remember Ritalin and other amphetamines, pharmaceutical amphetamines, being pushed on me when I was a kid because they tried to diagnose me with attention deficit disorder. I hate being sedentary. I can't stand to be still for too long. I just need to, even if it's just standing up and just kind of rocking or pacing or something, it physically doesn't feel good to be sedentary. So unfortunately, I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And I really, really hated my response to amphetamines. So I think it gave me a little bit of a greater awareness of what dopamine was at a younger age. Because I was like, what the is this? I don't like this.
Yeah.
And so I have the tendency to be very passive with things that afford dopamine, very, very moderate. And some things I abstain from, like if something's completely unnecessary. I'm just not a dopamine junkie. I know a lot of people nowadays are, especially with pharmaceutical amphetamines becoming a lot more popular and normalized.
Definitely.
But personally, for me, it's not my taste. And I think it's important for people to understand what hormonal cocktail, what brain chemistry is a happy place for them in life. Because I think that really answers a lot of questions for a person.
Yeah, I would agree. Do you have to do other things to, I guess, you like to be active and moving around. Do you ever have to not be active and moving around where you have to do something to kind of focus, or are you able to focus regardless?
I'm pretty good at being focused. I'm just better at doing tasks that are permissive with me to have some moving around.
Mhm.
I can
Like,
do
so,
like some tedious, obsessive things like organizing, but when it's things like that, I'll tend to multitask a little bit more because it physically doesn't feel good to be like crouched or too locked in like to a stationary position for too long. So
mhm.
I don't really have a focus problem cognitively. And I actually have a lot of initiative when it comes to like being able to get things done, keeping things organized. My organization skills are actually pretty phenomenal. I have,
Hmm.
yeah. But yeah, uh, so it is funny to have received the diagnosis of attention deficit disorder.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty over-diagnosed in America these days. I think like if there's a kid under 5 who gets up from being seated, I feel like doctors are quick to just go, oh, it's ADD. I'm a teacher, and I feel like half of my students are diagnosed ADD, and I don't think half of them actually have ADD. They just have parents who kind of want to try and calm them down with pills instead of
Well,
like
okay,
giving
so
them.
here's the thing. I think that there's a lot of really strange dialogue around attention deficit disorder. It's something that I've read on for quite some time. And I think the important thing that to correct that a lot of people are confused about is that attention deficit disorder is not an actual thing. And what I mean by that is that it's not a gene. It's not a like it's not, it doesn't have a singular medical, biological, whatever cause. Like it's a list of symptoms, characteristics, what have you. And when you see that grouping and that pattern, Western medicine has certain practices on how to address this quote unquote disorder. It's just a disorder. Like, oh, this isn't working. How do we change this? How do we make this actually work? How do we make this work for this person? Because this person is explaining this disorder within themselves, this thing that isn't working. And how do we fix it? And we have several approaches on how to deal with that. And that's how that language is, exists, is that, it's just a categorization regarding addressing those problems. It is not in itself a singular problem.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess like it is kind of subjective then of diagnosing. It's kind of up to a
Yeah.
doctor's discretion a little bit.
Yeah, which is why they also kind of come up with things like there's like the book called the 6 types of ADD, where they do different categories. The type that I was diagnosed with was ADD type 3, sometimes called anti-ADD or obsessive ADD, which is basically also known as over-focused ADD. So I don't get distracted, I get too focused. If anything, I have a hard time putting down a project.
Interesting. I never actually knew of all the 6 different types. I'm gonna have to look into that.
It's a pretty good book.
Nice. But what's it called? I usually have like about half hour, so we have about like 10 minutes left. I kind of want to hear a little bit about your views on gender roles, because I know you're a little bit passionate about that, or you've spoken on it before. So you say you're anti-feminist. What does that mean exactly?
It's funny because I kind of identified with that more historically in the past, but now it's kind of, it feels more like a vulgar term than a literal term for me, because there are some policies and political attitudes that I have that I think could technically be classified as quote unquote feminist, even though they're not necessarily mainstream feminist attitudes, but just based off of how they're constructed, I think they could be considered feminism.
Right.
think it's important for us to understand that feminism isn't intrinsically what is institutionalized, the things that are, not necessarily the things that are being implemented. So, for example, female suffrage, or 1994 was the year that in the United States, as a federal policy, it became illegal completely for female genital mutilation. So like no state is allowed to legally allow a child to have their vagina circumcised or mutilated.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I would say that it's not just a policy thing, but just not just policies that are passed, but like a person's own individual attitudes regarding policies. So it could be just like philosophies in certain groups and like individuals. But when I say or have said that I'm an anti-feminist, what I mean is that relative to what mainstream feminism looks like now, I disagree with them. I disagree regarding what their diagnosis is of a lot of problems, and even the ones that I agree with them on, I tend to disagree with them regarding the solution to the problems.
So what's one of the biggest things you disagree with on like the mainstream feminist movement?
Let's see. So they recently pushed to have, and by recently I mean like several years ago, they pushed to have the legal definition of rape changed. And I understand that maybe it needed to be updated, but I don't like how it was updated. And the way it was updated is that it specifically covers forcibly penetrated, but it does not cover made to penetrate anymore. So right now, relative to the male physical anatomy, if say a man was like intoxicated or inebriated and I could overpower him, or let's just say I'm like a hulky enough woman where I could actually physically overpower this man, if I get him physically aroused to an erection and I impale myself against his will, his consent, that does not meet the technical definition of rape anymore.
No way. I never knew that.
Yeah, and that's something that I take issue with.
Yeah, it's I gotta think about that more, not just in real time. That's super interesting. That's crazy. Yes, I guess what's the feminist movement is in agreement with that?
They are the ones who had the definition, the legal definition changed to what it is now.
Yeah, that's
you can make a generalization and say that everyone who necessarily identifies as feminist is going to agree with that, because the feminism that is institutionalized doesn't necessarily represent every feminist or represent the majority of those who identify as feminist.
right.
So it's tricky to have a conversation when you're taking opposition to it. So when I say that I'm an anti-feminist, I'm usually referring to I am opposed to the mainstream feminist narrative that has been implemented in my lifetime regarding institutionalized feminism.
Makes sense. So what's something that you would change, I guess? What's one of the first things you would change if you were in kind of in charge?
I mean,
would you change that rule? Would that be one of the first things, is changing that rule, or would you what would you kind of promote?
I mean the first thing that hops out to me, I don't necessarily know if this answers your question, but the first thing that hops out to me is that I am against male genital mutilation. So I'm against circumcising a healthy infant boy against his consent. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's nice. I don't think it's humane. I think it's pretty terrible.
Yeah, you
So
know,
that's
it
the thing
does
that
seem like a pretty weird thing that we do just because it says it in this really old book. I definitely, it's interesting that it hasn't kind of been debated more than it has.
well, we actually don't do it because it's in quote unquote in some book.
Well,
Because
that's how it started, right? It's not what we're doing now.
yeah. So I think that's how culturally it has been carried on through tradition in most cases is that it's been a religious policy, and that's been a tradition that's been carried through religion. But the reason why we're doing it here now in the United States is because of Dr. Kellogg. Let's see, I think he was like mostly a doctor in like the 1920s, maybe a little bit beforehand also. But he had really strong puritanical beliefs, and I think that was around the time that also other people were kind of taking some stronger puritanical beliefs. He did a lot of preaching on how to get people to be more productive, pure, and masturbate less. So as a doctor, he prescribed this as a means to promote a healthy lifestyle that of no masturbation, because there were some attitudes that things like syphilis were caused by masturbation. You were made sick from touching yourself. Christian Science was like a little bit more popular.
Yeah, wow. That's
So
I'm
it's a
learning so
normal
much
thing
from
in
you,
our
Katelynne. I'm
culture
loving
that
this.
is really popular, and it's actually from Christian Science.
That's crazy. Yeah, I'm learning a lot from you, Katelynne. I definitely I have like 6 things that I'm writing down right now that I have to research after this and kind of dive deeper into, because a lot of this I was definitely unaware of. Pretty fascinating.
Oh, yeah, sure.
How do you know so much? Do you just read all the time? Do you just naturally remember a lot, or
both?
Both. And what I guess I'm gonna kind of be wrapping it up in the next couple of minutes. What are some things that you're like passionate and learning about now that you're trying to research more and learn about, or do you already know a little bit of everything?
Let's see. One thing that I've been looking into is the condition of the concept of skinny pill. So there are a couple of subjects that I pop in on every once in a while. It's a little too tedious to follow them continually. So I kind of go on a cycle where I check in and see what updates have happened on certain things. Like one is cryonics, like cryogenic research. And lately I've been doing my homework on what's the condition of progress for the quote unquote fat pill that allows people to help not gain excess weight, to manage what now we would consider to be an evolutionary flaw.
What makes you passionate about that?
I know that I personally, I don't care to be overweight. I like to have a certain body composition. I like a little bit of fat, a little bit of muscle, a little bit of bone. Like I like feeling like a jungle cat,
Yeah.
I don't like feeling weighed down. I don't like too much friction or things rubbing together. So it's just, my own personal interest on like how to manage what is physically comfortable for me. But I also know that like there are a lot of people who have a really hard time. Like there's a lot of misinformation out there where it requires a higher than average science literacy to be able to figure out which thing, what information is outdated that's still floating around, and what information is good. And I think like, for example, one of the greatest examples of this is that there's still people that have misconceptions regarding cholesterol.
Right, that there's good cholesterol.
That's the misconception.
Oh, no way. I get that. I was giving the example of the misconception.
No. So first off, the thing that the thing that people refer to as good cholesterol, that's the only thing that's actually cholesterol. The thing that people refer to as bad cholesterol is not technically even cholesterol. HDL, it is your body's means of transporting cholesterol.
So when people take cholesterol like medication, is that just to help the transporting of cholesterol then? It's not really for the cholesterol?
It is solving a symptom to the problem instead of solving the problem.
Like most medications.
Yes. So when your HDL is elevated, that's the thing that they talk about that's bad. Like, oh my God, you know, your cholesterol is really high. When they talk about that, like it's a bad thing, they're talking about your HDL, the quote unquote bad cholesterol that isn't actually cholesterol.
Wow.
And the reason why that can be high or spiked at certain times is that your HDL has more than one responsibility, or at least it's utilized in more than one way. It's not just utilized to transport cholesterol, which is really, really good for you, and imperative for cell repair, absolutely imperative for cell repair, but rather HDL is also used to manage things like take care of like free radicals. So like when you have like bad things going on in your system, or so like if your stress is really, really high, or that can cause a temporary spike in your HDL because, you know, your body just responds to stress and what have you. Your HDL can also be spiked up really high if you, say, have leaky gut syndrome. And even though we tell people to do things like, or at least we used to tell people to have margarine to manage their cholesterol because your cholesterol is too high and there's no cholesterol in this margarine. Well, the margarine has hydrogenated oils. People have adverse reactions to that. It has the tendency to cause people to have leaky gut syndrome, and that will cause their free radicals to go up. So over time, it actually causes more problems.
Interesting. I feel like everything there's side effects that people don't really mention. Like I heard someone discussing yesterday that like coffee was good for you because it does XYZ, but someone else was saying coffee was bad for you because it does XYZ, and it's there's a lot of things like say, yeah, exactly.
That altruism is bullshit. There is not a binary. It's that there's benefits and costs to different choices, and you know things are a lot of it's unique to the person.
A lot of it's unique to the person. I feel like there's no cookie cutter healthy for everyone. It depends a bit on your composition.
Yeah. For example, you know, we all know that like there are some like adverse problems that come with drinking or excess drinking of, say, caffeinated beverages or alcoholic beverages. But we've also seen science that is produced that says that like, oh, you know, people experience health benefits from having this. Okay, well, what are the health benefits? Well, it has properties in it that increase your circulation. Okay, so there are bad things about it and there are good things about it because it increases your circulation. But here's the thing, you can also do other things to increase your circulation that don't have those costs.
Right, exactly.
So like you can decide to rationalize it that way. You're like, oh, it has some benefits. Okay, no, other things have those benefits too, but you don't want to do those things because those aren't fun or enjoyable. They don't get you the high, the drugs, the brain cocktail that you want.
Yeah.
Embrace the fact that your happiness in life has a certain chemistry frequency, and we all have a different, you know, opinion of what that is.
Right.
Embrace it, own it, and try to figure out how to do it without physically killing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I saw last year, I think it was a headline floating around that like wine was as good for you as going to the gym once a week. So everyone's like, oh, I'm just going to drink wine every day better than going to the gym. And it's like, there's probably one benefit that's as good, but there's 20 things that are bad for you. You're just not focusing on that.
Oh my gosh, I could have the longest conversation with you about fetal alcohol syndrome.
Well, I would love to hear it. I'm not lying when I said I learned so much from you this last like half hour. So you have just endless information. I love how specific your information is too. Like just referring to Dr. Kellogg in the 1920s. You don't even just like say stories. You literally give multiple facts about it, which super cool, super interesting. I learned a lot, and I definitely would love to chat with you again. And I feel like there's 20 different things that you're kind of an expert on. We can kind of just pick one and really delve into it next time if you're down with that.
Certainly, certainly.
I'm about ready to wrap up. Is there anything you want to say to wrap up, or are you all set? Any last closing thoughts?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me. Is there any last thing that you want to ask me before we end this?
No, I had a blast. I guess what's New Year's resolution for 2022?
New Year's 2022. I'm gonna double my efforts when it comes to physical care, self-care, quafting and stuff like that. I used to do a little bit more of that for myself pre-pandemic. I kind of eased back on it because I was focusing on helping other people, helping my community, and building. But I've kind of I've dilated, I think, enough, and I think it's time for me to start contracting again and centering and focusing on myself. So I think that's going to be my focus for 2022.
I like it. I will hold you accountable and make sure that you reach your goals. But thank you again, and thank you to anyone who is listening to us. This is the year's 2021. I'm hoping in 10 years, either Katelynne or I are rich and famous, and we're going to look back at this episode like, oh, that was crazy before we were ever known. But thanks again. Appreciate it. I'm going to stop recording now. See you guys later.